Um, Wendy has come to us and is coming to us from Australia. Yes, she is. And it is like really early in the morning there. And God love her. She has acquiesced to being with us and answering questions and so forth that we have. But I got to tell you a little bit about Wendy because you need to know this woman. She is unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, where do we start? She's an experienced manager and company director. She was raised, I'm kind of going back and forth with about four different bios, raised in rural Australia. Yes, she was. And she, in fact, was shaped by their time in rural. And of course, I was raised on a farm, so she talks about work ethic is nothing new, and it certainly has not been. So what she did with her life is she started. Well, first of all, I have to say, in the day, education for girls wasn't that prevalent, right? And all I'm saying, Wendy, is you must have been smarter than smart for your parents to support you getting educated because you got educated beyond words and you have so used that education. So how was it that they were able to support you going to school as a girl?
Oh, I think for my parents, education was the dream for
Okay.
their three children. And they'd both left school at 13, and they were both big readers. And, it's a unifying proposition in my life that education and reading are so closely connected. If you can read, you can do almost anything.
Well, there you have it. There you have it. There you have it. And so what Wendy did is started as a secondary school teacher. And then she left this classroom for public life in 1968, and she was 27 at the time. And if you guys are doing the math, she is a bold and bodacious feminist. Yes, she is.
I am
83 years young, right? When
83 years young, yes. Except when you just think, whoa. I wake up sometimes and I think, I wonder who they're talking about when they say someone's 83, and then I realize it's me. Whoever thought it would happen?
Excellent. Well, you are absolutely so accomplished. I can't even imagine how you stuffed all this into 83 years, and you are not ready to put down the
No, no,
hang up your tennis shoes for sure.
no,
So
no. I'm going boldly into the night. Yes.
so Wendy has crossed the public, the private, and the community sectors. She's done education, family planning, human rights, public health, overseas aid and development, conservation, heritage, media, and the arts. We're going to dig a little bit into some of these, but let me tick off some of this because it's amazing, her accomplishments. She's a founding member of the Women's Electoral Lobby, and she continues to be an advocate through her many significant leadership roles in national and international bodies, 8 years as deputy chair of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, 10 years as chancellor of the University of Canberra, 12 years of service to Pan Australia as the chair, 3 years as global deputy chair for Plan International. We're going to have Wendy explain some of these. And in 2016, she completed 8 years as the chair of Headspace, the National Youth Mental Health Foundation. And in 2017, she completed 9 years as chair of Circus Oz, Australia's leading circus. This is just, I was reading that and I was like, Wendy, the circus, cut me a break. How did you make this transition?
Well, I've always been interested in the arts, and I've always been interested in community-based artistic performance.
Yes.
And for years, I'd taken my children to Circus Oz when they toured Australia, and they started off a little group of 5. And interestingly, they went to the Atlanta Olympic Games, and they were doing busking to make money. And they met some Americans and some Canadians, and the Canadians said, oh, you guys should actually do a circus performance. They said, oh, we're members of Circus Oz. Anyway, they became very friendly with the people from Canada, who are probably the leading people. And in a way, they could claim to have birthed Circus du Soleil, which was really fabulous. But I'm interested in giving those kids a go because they end up as writers, artists, acrobats, musicians, and so on. And a lot of activity, artistic activity, is traced back to the community arts. And that's really where my heart goes to start with. I mean, I've been the chair of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra or the deputy for years, but they're okay. They want from you money and position, but and a tough advice that, you know, about audience. But the circus is a different thing. It just comes from nowhere. Kids who haven't had the stock exchange for breakfast, you know that none of those conversations, and suddenly they're amazing. And that when we went to New York, you know, we were on Broadway, and I've always thought I want to be on Broadway. And Jessica Parker came and wrote on the T-shirts of all the performers and came to dinner with us. Oh, it was so exciting for them and for me. It was marvelous. So they're a little circus who thought big and toured the world. And so I went to help them really set up a governance structure and to promote them and get money for them, of course.
Wow. And of course, you have well, as I say, from the sheltered country school girl to campaigning for contraception, from passionate teacher to lifelong advocate for education, smashing the glass ceiling again and again and again and again, and showing the way to subsequent generations of women. You have championed change across all of these sectors, and of course, obviously, including the arts. Tell us about the Indigenous painting on the wall behind you, or the piece of art.
Well, that's a really beautiful painting that when I was traveling around Australia at various times, I really met Indigenous artists and I started looking at them, and I thought, that's the place for me to invest my money. That wasn't a particularly expensive painting, but it would be if you were buying it now. So I bought it, and it's showing women's waterhole, the waterholes along the stream and the birthing places for the women where they go. So when you look at that, you can see the waterhole, and along the way they find their birthing holes. And for me, it brings everything together in life for women. Everything's about birthing and family and safety and health and education. And most of the women artists that I hang in this room are in their 90s.
Yes, of course.
So they are the most amazing role models for me, that I think they're still going. You know, they just keep on keeping on, and they're painting under really, you know, often difficult conditions, but they keep on telling their stories in their artwork, and it's just a marvelous thing. It makes my heart beat too.
I know.
It really makes my heart beat.
This gives me goosebumps to think about it. You know, the other thing that gives me goosebumps is Wendy has written her memoir. Don't Be Too Polite, Girls. I don't know if you can see this. Maybe I'm not on the screen, but this is the cover of Wendy's book. Don't Be Too.
I've got one too.
Thank you. Hold that right up. Look at her in red, the woman in red.
It's what my mother calls the bold color for girls.
Yes. So, you know, this whole aspect of writing your memoir, well, first of all, I completely applaud you for doing that. And I am grateful for generations to come to be able to read about you. And what you've done in terms of this book is given people born in the town of Orange in New South Wales, Australia, and then you experience those conservative values, and then you saw some opportunities, right? Beyond
Yes.
you know, adopting a domestic and agricultural role, and then you saw some gaps, if I remember reading correctly, about the limitations placed on women, yourself and other girls, young girls, older girls, and the expectation that you brought to the fore to prioritize family life. Well, you allowed people to not just be a mom and to be a farm worker, and basically the birthing, if you will, that you helped be the midwife for, right?
Yes.
Not good English,
Yes.
but
Yes.
you gave women the verve and the vision, if I don't mind saying so, to face their obstacles and bust through their obstacles. And I think we're coming down to systemic injustice, are we not, Wendy?
We are. And I think during that time, you know, I learned a lot of things about myself, But one of the things that I did know, and I tell young women all the time, I encourage them to think, if someone thinks you can do something, say yes and think about it later.
Right now.
Except in matters of sexual adventure and liaison. You know, I'm an old family planner at heart, so I don't want girls getting into trouble.
Yeah.
But, you know, all the things that I've been seemingly not qualified that I've said yes to, like being, you know, one of the directors of higher education in schools and in higher education, and schools. I think I remember saying to the minister who said, you know, you criticise me from the outside in the community, just like a man would say, you know,
yes.
a bit petulant.
Yes.
But, you know, I'm giving you an opportunity to join this board. And in my head, a script was running that said, what? How can I do this? What would I know about this? Anyway, I said, oh, look, I'm not sure I know much about higher education. He said, well, if you don't, haven't you been to university? And I said, yes. He said, oh, that'll do. And until then, I thought the people who were on these boards were, you know, were gods. It's a bit like when you go to university and you think everyone there knows everything, and then you discover they don't. And so I said yes. And on that board of 18, there were 17 men and me.
Oh my gosh, Wendy.
And I sat there for 2 meetings, and 14 of them were engineers and the others were bureaucrats. And I'm thinking, actually, I know more about education than most of these people. And it was a real revelation, because often when you're let inside the tent, which is what Lyndon Baines Johnson used to talk about when I was teaching school in America, yes. If you can get inside the tent and understand the conversation, that's when you can make amazing change. Oh. So I accepted the invitation, and I did change. It made change, and it also gave me a confidence about my capacity outside my training. And that stayed with me ever since.
I'm so riveted by that, because we women tend to want to know every single thing, and we're not maybe
That's
completely qualified.
Yeah.
Nonsense. Move.
Yeah, absolutely.
Say yes.
Yes. Just say yes and think about it later.
Well, of course.
And I've done that in about probably ever since I've left teaching. Every role I've had, technically, people would think I'm not qualified for. But once you get around the board table and you can have the conversation, you find your voice there, you grow and they grow. And they begin to trust us.
This finding your voice, it runs complete line right through everything I've read of you, is lifting women up and allowing them to, you know, one, survive. You're giving women, in many cases, survival tips, right? And then you're encouraging these women to find their voices and listen to it. And then what would you be labeled? This was no surprise to me. I'm reading along several sources, and there's so much written about you. I didn't even touch, you know, touch it from a perspective of exhausting it yet. And so you're talking in these male-dominated environments, and you're speaking your truth, and they label you a communist lesbian. All day.
Oh, I know. And even in Parliament.
Yes. That is of course, they want to undermine any woman advocating for change. They think that's going to make you zip it. And frankly, I happen to be a lesbian woman, but I've always said, if we all say we're lesbian, then they can't hang any of us, right?
That's right. And I'm in the process of moving a house that I've done in the last couple of days. There's a very nice young woman I hired as a project manager. Well, no, she's my age. She's not young. But she said to me, you know, I used to work at family planning when you were there. And I said, why did you go there? And she said, because it was the only place lesbians could go, and gay men, because there was just nowhere else where they were treated as humans.
That's right.
And I said, oh, that makes me so happy for you to say that, because I always believed that. That's where I became what I don't even know what the right expression is, but that's when I became all accepting. And I remember the first secretary I ever had in my life was a lesbian. Yeah. And she used to say to me, look, by the time I leave you, you'll be fine. You'll understand the choices that I've made in my life and the choices you've made in your life, the choices that were foisted upon us for whatever reason. And she said, "You'll never be the same." And I have never been the same. I've always been, and I can't believe it. She's 75 now. And I think, but familiarity with scary things like differences in sexuality or differences in skin color or differences in physical capacity because of mental incapacity, they're really only just little challenges where actually you have to make the effort if you're not one, if that's not your label.
Absolutely.
And I think I now I have mentored a lot of people in Australia, and interestingly, a lot of men.
Yes.
Men trust me.
Yes.
Because, well, they still like to label me because they think that works, but it doesn't.
Yes.
But I do think that men have great difficulty working with women side by side. And I just say, well, it's practice that makes the difference. You have to learn to trust a woman's voice, and you have to learn to see that she does things. And interestingly, when I wrote Don't Be Too Polite, Girls, I just started, I'd launched a book called Don't Fence Me In, which was my first memoir. Yes. That was because of the Andrews sisters. That was the title. I always use song titles.
Of course, yes.
But when I got to 60, and I thought, well, what the hell do I do now? I've done all the things that, I've done menopause and children and husband and that sort of a life, and brave young feminist. Now I'm a more mature feminist. I have to think what I can do, and I say to them, your career's not over. For God's sake, it takes off. You've done all the things expected of women. Just get on with your life.
Now you
and
can
say yes all the time to opportunity, and it's really exciting times for us. Yes. Because we're living longer lives.
Yes, we are. And we're living richer lives, I think, because
much richer.
Like you are continuing to be vocal, and we younger women are, smart enough to listen at your feet. Yes, you've been married to your husband, Gordon, since 1964. You have 3 kids together, and you've, done that part of your life's journey. But let's talk, sorry, that's a beautiful thing.
No, go
ahead.
Sorry, no, go on. You go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted just to tip our audience off onto some of your survival tips. And one is, don't be afraid to speak up, stand by your values, cultivate resilience, build support networks. I just ticked off 4. Which one do you want to give us some more background on?
Well, I think you have friends for all occasions. Yes. I think that friendships aren't all about who you went to school with.
There you go.
But I see people clustering to those friends. Yes. And I know now at my age, many of my closer friends, wherever I've met them in life, are now not with me. They've died in the last, 5 years. So if you don't have friendships that go up, down, and sideways, older, younger, and peer group, you'll be left without friends, and you'll be left without stimulus, and you'll be left without the capacity to imagine things. So my best friends, who at the moment are still the people I met when I was a young mother, and we all lived in a community together, well, in the same streets or whatever. Community is incredibly important, and we redefined that community through resident action campaigns. My mother said to me, "Why do you want to live in a slum?" I said, well, it's not a slum, it's now a multi-million-dollar community, of course, which I couldn't afford to go back to because I renovated it. But I think the power of friendship, and I actually have quite a lot of friends. I wouldn't think of them anyway, but I'll say it in this, that I do have a lot of lesbian friends, and I have a lot of gay men friends.
Yes.
And they mix and match, my community. But so I have very variable friends, but I also have a lot of young women friends, and they keep you young because they challenge you. They trust me enough to challenge me.
Wow.
And I feel so proud of them and the way they're challenging the world we live in, whether it's on climate change,
Yes.
a lot of them on music. And I love birthday parties. I have birthday parties, and I have big ones in the decades and, you know, smaller ones. But in the big decade ones, I put everyone, like I have 150 people, and put everyone in the same room and mix them up on tables. So mixing up your friends in safe places, they go out and form new friendships, you know, independently of you, and that's good. That's what it should be. And I think the other thing is you need to find ways of staying connected, and the friendships do that.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, I'm reinventing myself at this stage. You know, I've finished with the book.
Yes.
That book. I mean, I still do a few things. I've still got a few gigs, but I basically did gigs around Australia for 18 months, and that's enough. And then I look and I think, well, what do I do next? And I've had to face the fact that you do have to spend quite a bit of time on your health.
There you go. And
looking back, I mean, I'm relatively healthy. I'm damaged by the Australian sun, you know, and no, of course, I grew up with no skin cream or anything like that. So I will be having my scalp played with next week.
Okay.
But
well, we're for you there.
We have to look after our health to lead good lives. That's right. And we have to learn to avoid snake oil salesmen around health.
Yes.
We need to stick to the core medical health. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the US now if the Kennedy becomes the Secretary of Health.
Well, apparently
I don't know where the checks and balances will be put into that. But so health, exercise and well-being. So we can't stay at home and sit down and eat. And we need to learn to be mobile. So for me, it's to keep on learning.
Yes.
And to keep healthy.
Yes.
And part of that is friendships. And part of that is being challenged. I mean, most of us can find free spaces, you know, street galleries or movie theatres, and we can find an interesting life now in television in a way we once couldn't. And your television screen is an entry to the world, you know, flick onto a different channel.
Yes.
I now find myself watching, I helped set up Aboriginal television in 88. And really, it was our bicentennial celebrations, and Aboriginal people were furious about it because they said, we've been here 60,000 years and you just, you know, celebrating a group of white men who arrived. And the truth is we sort of were. Yeah. But we set up a television station in the centre of Australia for them, and it's been difficult, but it survived. It's called NITV. And I see they do a lot of the stuff I love, you know. I deeply love America. I've always thought it's the best and the worst in the world. And my year of teaching in Pittsburgh was just fantastic. But in that time, they do a lot of Black American broadcasting and a lot of jazz concerts and so on. And all those favourite musicians of mine, like Ella and so on, you know, I love Ella Fitzgerald. She's definitely going to be playing at my funeral. Yes. And I just think your mind is the thing that controls most of you. And if you can just keep it open. And when I look, you know, they often play the Martin Luther King marches again and, you know, big American events. And I just adore that. So I think opportunity, health, education, and fun. You have to have some fun in your life. And sometimes life can look really dark. Yes. But if you can just find someone who makes you laugh, could be a child, could be a friend, but you do need some love. And of course, love is everything. Love is all there is. That's right. That's right. There's the song. Right there, right there. Now,
not only have you held these positions in government and in the arts and so forth, but you have founded a national consulting practice called McCarthy Mentoring, where you provide mentors to major corporations and organizations. Now, your daughter, Sophie, is running this, but talk to us about the genesis of how you, broke through and got into corporations, because they had to be run by a lot of white men.
Well, it was a very interesting thing. I was reading a lot in the 90s, a lot of work of all the American writers, business writers at the time, because I thought I'm going to be working in corporate life for the next 20 years. I need to do some reading, and some of the British writers as well. And I came across someone called James Clutterbuck, who was writing, James might not, and it might not have been James. Anyway, Clutterbuck's the family name. And he talked about mentoring. And I thought, mentoring. So I was working with Citibank.
Okay.
And the boss of Citibank said to me, I'd like you to do a cultural survey. Could you do that? Well, I'd never done one before, but here we go. I said, sure, love to. So I go and research that, and I thought, anyway, I did it, and we did a double-sided one, interviews and just questionnaires.
Yes. And
out of it came a whole lot of material about how women were treated in the bank. And, I went to New York and I talked to them in the foundation about it. And I said, the conversation has to change in the bank, or women are never going to get there. And you could see that there was definitely a female level.
Yes.
And so they said, well, the CEO said, well, why don't you do a mentoring program? Hadn't done one before. So I said, sure, yes, love to. Well, suddenly I was the hottest property in Sydney. Oh, Citibank, the big legal practices, every other bank. And I said to my daughter one day, who just had a third child and was on maternity leave, I said, do you want to come and give me a hand? And she said, sure. Anyway, in the end, I sold it to her. Oh, my husband said, don't give away family things. We sell them because there are other people to be considered. So, and she now, she's got a program she does in Michigan, and she does it all over the world. Oh. And it's it's a magical process because, and I designed it so that, and anyone, it's free to think about for anyone. I didn't just sponsor people. I went to people and I said, okay, you give me all the direct reports to the CEO. Yes. And I matched them after an interview with someone who could be their mentor, and I managed the program. And I wanted the mentor and the mentee to achieve, after 6 or 12 months, a relationship where the person being mentored could hear his or her own voice. And that's the voice that had to carry them through business. That if it doesn't feel right and your head and your heart aren't connected, it's not right. Yeah. And you have to learn to do that. And a lot of the stuff you do is not right. And then the American boss of internationally just started up a program called Respected Work in City throughout the world. Okay. And that was good. And my mentoring program was, that, but I never let them own it. I just, did the work and provided. And I did that for about 10 years there. Oh. And that changed a lot because there were generations of people who came through and had a mentor. And it's such a magical relationship to have someone you can totally trust. Absolutely. And everything's built on trust. And that really is the metaphor for good discourse. Absolutely. And I see people all the time, I'm now, I'm now looking at the sort of people who are happy, whose children I mentored are going to university. Yes. And they were just young women or young men at the time. So and it was the first big practice like that in Australia. And nobody had anything called a mentoring practice. Yes. Although individual people were mentored, but this was quite tightly designed so that, there was a contract. And one of the things, Deborah, that's important is people often sent you to conventions or conferences and so on. Yes. And most people had a good time at those and learned something. But I'm an educator, and I know that when you come back from one of those, nobody the slightest bit interested in listening to your download about it. I just go away, off in fairyland.
Yeah.
But it's good as an intervention, but it's not good enough for learning. You have to have learning graduated over a period of time. We don't go to school for 1 year when we're 5 and think that'll be it. We take you through a process, and the mentoring, there are steps in a mentoring process where in the end, your mentee basically says, thanks, that's enough, I've done it. Yes. And I see them, they come back, and I did a lot of work with Indigenous people too.
Yes.
And I think they take leadership. They have the confidence to put their hands up and say, I can do it. And that's the graduation thing. So that's been a magical thing. And mentoring is full of love for people, because you want them to understand the best about themselves.
Yes.
Anyway.
And that is, when people are listened into speech, especially by a person who has, rank over them and so forth, I think it's such a beautiful alchemy, if you will. I couldn't agree with you more. We all go off to conferences and we come back, and it's kind of like, almost like you're catching up with what, backed up while you were gone. But I think what you're talking about, Wendy, is this a piece of what you're talking about is threading through, not just being about change, going to a conference, learning a few things, but really sowing the seed of transformation. And we have to think that these mentoring experiences were completely transformative.
Yes, they are. And it's the most wonderful thing. And, when I was writing a magazine column, we had a magazine called Cleo, which is a sex advice column, which I wrote for 10 years. And I still have women coming up to me and saying, oh, I'm so glad you told me to dump that bloke, I nearly married him, and I'm so glad I went to family planning, or I might have had a baby. And these are breakthrough moments, and they're not necessarily written in the history books, but, I for 10 years, I wrote that column. So I reached hundreds of people.
Of course you do.
And just saying, no, you don't say yes to sex first night, Jason. So the Kylie Minogue and an actor called Jason were very big in the entertainment business at the time, and every girl wanted to look, and still does look like Kylie Minogue. They'd like to do that.
Okay.
And so half the girls in Australia seem to be called Kylie and half the boys called Jason. So let's call them Kylie and Jason for the purpose. So Kylie would write to me and say, Jason said, if I really loved him, I'd have sex with him. What do you think?
Yes.
And I said, well, I think it's probably a good idea to wait for a while and think about it. And just before you do, just pop into family planning and Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And of course, over a passage of time, it's very easy to see you didn't really want to have sex with Jason that much after all. You can defer that. And if Jason's not interested in a condom and you thinks you should take the pill, well, whose decision is it? Blah, 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 blah. We all know those things. Yes. But I was able to write them, and I've never been frightened. And this is another really important thing. I've never been frightened about being based in a community. This was a magazine like Cosmopolitan.
Yes.
And I wrote for a newspaper, which was trashy. I wrote a sex column. That was the first one I wrote, sex education column. Well, they called it family relationships, whatever it was.
Yes.
But when I said to family planning, well, I've been asked to do this, and they're saying, well, why do we want to write to those sort of people? And I've thought about it since the Trump thing. And I've said, those people are us. We get government money to help run this service. You know what? We're serving all people. So the truck driver who can't get pregnant, and turned out to be that they were wearing, it was a breakthrough. They were wearing tight jeans or abalone fishermen, so they were not in the right conditions when they came home. They get their wife pregnant. They wanted to be, and they were feeling like failures. And women who sought permission, from violence, and a lot of women wrote to me who really weren't interested in men with sex, and of course had not used the word lesbian.
Yes.
They didn't see themselves as that.
Sure.
They just thought they must have to be meeting bad men, probably were as well. But And I think you only find those breakthroughs in the community. So that's, I've always loved that opportunity to speak to what I call everyday people. That was a very long-winded response.
No, I loved it, because one of the other specifics of your book is embracing education and curiosity, challenging traditional gender norms, and so forth. And sex is so tricky of a topic, especially years and years ago, that for you to be writing about it, everybody was tuning in. You had a paucity of people actually pinging you, Wendy. You had hundreds of thousands of readers, I'm going to bet, and they were riveted by your being frank and probably throwing a lot of humor in to take some of the pressure off of these normal questions that young girls have. I mean, young
yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's, I was at a girls' reunion the other day. My daughters had some friends, most of whom she went to school with, and they said, you know, we used to love coming to your place on Fridays before Cleo came out, because we read the column before our friends got it the next week. Okay.
Well, they were the bee's knees. They had the advance notice.
Oh, yes.
So fun. That is totally fun. Now let's talk about a couple other things. Say financially savvy. Of course, that's my swim lane. I'm all about women controlling their own money, and not just controlling their own money, but controlling their intentionality around their money, right? I don't need you to have a separate account from your partner, but nonetheless, I do need and want for women to be savvy around our money, so that we have more choices.
So important, yes.
More choices, right? Yeah, no worries.
Well, you know, if I was rerunning my life, I would say that it was luck that I'm financially well off, because my husband made more money than me most of the time. Later on in life, I made more.
Sure.
But I had no understanding whatsoever, despite the fact that we were not well off. In fact, we were quite poor. I had no idea how to make money, or any concept that, you know, the man was other than the financial plan.
Yes.
And that was, you know, my generation. Now, you know, I've encouraged my daughter, I encourage all her friends, and I have a sister who's 25 years younger than me.
Oh,
and wow. I'm her sort of alternative mother.
Yes, it sounds like it.
And her husband recently died quite young. And I said to her, there's no way that I'm going to die without you having a house, because they fell on hard times. And I said, we just need to get this sorted. And we have to raise girls to know that it is not the responsibility of men to provide them with things, and that they have to take a joy and an intellectual, however educated they are, that they have to be independent, to raise their own money and to find a way of dealing property. And there are lots of women's financial organisations being set up now, but it is still quite hard. And curiously, girls are going back to taking their husbands' names. You know, there was a very big period.
Yes.
When we, you know, I changed my name when I was married. I didn't know you couldn't.
Yes, of course.
But then we had a time when everyone could. And my daughter still has our family name.
Okay.
But I see increasingly now the rise of the influencer and so on. Well, the influencer's making money. I'm not sure that her clients are necessarily. But taking the name, it's still, I'm so glad you raised it, because I should have put that in my things about, you know, your own voice. Having your own financial independence at even the most modest level is incredibly important. And I know that was my mother, really. She never had it.
Yes.
And she was dependent on me, and then and my father, and then, you know, various men in her life. And in a way, she was just a different version. I'm a different version of her. But I do have the financial independence. And my husband really, the moment came to me when I was a mother of an 8 months baby, and I was thinking time to go back to work. But I was so, you know, so in love with this child and my new life.
Sure.
And I remember my husband saying to me, well, of course you'll go back to work. I went back to work when we had a baby. I know I didn't have birthing. You've had a birthing period. He said, you need to go back to work. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I thought, I've never thought about this. And seriously, I hadn't.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so we spent a lot of time talking about it. And he said, you know, we've got the same education. We earn about the same income. And I like to be at home with Sophie and the dog and so on. He said, we need to make this work together. We've done everything today together, traveled the world, so on. He said, we'll do this together. And after that, everything changed. So we shared things, you know, double bed, separate bank account, and a joint bank account. And I think that's a really important thing. And for all relationships, that there's an equality in managing finances. And for women, it's incredibly important. The most shocking statistic I can tell you in Australia at the moment is the face of poverty is a 60-year-old woman.
Oh, it's true here.
She may have been married to a multimillionaire.
Yeah.
And that's not acceptable.
It's not. And in the United States, a white woman makes 83 cents to that of her equally trained white male counterpart. But of course, Black women and brown women and Indigenous women and make a paucity of that. And it's incumbent upon all of us to use our privilege. And you've certainly done systemic work,
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood and all the, or whatever it's called in Australia. And I cannot speak more highly than put an exclamation point on your statements, because I think now, Wendy, the subconscious piece, right? That in so much as, you know, I give talks all the time, money isn't just money, right? Subconsciously, it's kind of like how much we're bringing in, that's how much we're worth. And so when we're not, quote unquote, bringing money in, but we're also doing all the work and tending to the child or children, I think there's something that eats at women's confidence, such that I'm not sure they are out there saying yes when they don't absolutely know if they can do it. And it's voices like yours that say yes.
Say yes. And I think the other thing I used to hammer in the Cleo column, which was really about relationships, you know, sex is the shorthand word really, but it was about relationships, is the best relationships in the world are between equals.
Now you're talking. There you go. Absolutely.
You know, it's just one of those mantras. Say yes. If someone thinks you can do it, you can. Yeah. And the best relationships are between equals. So in marriages, whether they're married or, you know, it's common law marriage, right, that is the best relationship. That's when everything can be on the table and can be sorted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dependency is the enemy. But there are periods of dependency. Your husband or partner can be sick and there can be birth, but you know,
seasons,
they come and go.
But we don't like it's a continuum. Seasons of dependency. I just don't want to buy a house there.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
I don't want to live there for decades and decades, right?
Yes, yes.
It takes a toll.
Yeah.
Now you're also talking in your book about staying calm under pressure and using humor to disarm opponents and celebrating small wins. Give us a few tips around these notions.
I think the culmination of that thinking was the campaign in 2017 to get abortion in my state off the criminal code, where both the perpetrator of the abortion and the woman who had it were allowed to be put in jail for 10 years. And we just said, we've got some common law procedures that enable this, but this is ridiculous. And we're looking at the US, where we could see issues with Roe v. Wade and things changing. Right. And we said, you know, nothing's forever. We have to, that's the big learning, that women's rights, you know, we win them. Yes. And then people challenge them and they move away. So we've got to get this fixed. So it's an emotional issue at one level, but I'd learned to be calm and I'd learned to be strategic. I've marched and screamed and I've cried about these things, but a group of us got together who worked together on this in 1972. Yes. And we said, what can we do from this? And we got very strategic, and we were facing a state election, and we wrote to the incumbent and the challenger and said, we're not bringing this on in the election, but this has to change.
Okay.
And I said, whoever wins will be in your door a week after to start the process. And we went to the independents who convened a cross-party group to do it. And it went like a well-organised military campaign. There was drama and tears, and there were men in dresses with incense and so on parading the streets. But we had already, by the time we got there, and I said to the Minister for Health, now, what are we going to do? And he said, you look after the community and I'll look after the legislature. And he kept his word. And the end of a very stressful 6 weeks, exactly the same people held together across party, and we changed the law forever. And that law can't be anything can be, undone and done again.
Yes.
But it's highly unlikely that it's going to, although people are trying again. But I did learn the wisdom of being strategic, ticking the progress, crossing the dangers, and staying calm under pressure. And I've learned to do that for quite a long time. I've learned to stare down people. I remember when I was 12, walking home from school, and this boy said to me, "Anyway, your father's a drunk." And I said, "So?" I don't know how that came out of my mouth. And he just astonished, but I never, ever got teased about that again. And my father was a drunk. But I learned somehow. I pulled out of my system.
Yes.
And I've often told that story, and it's not because I don't love I did love my father, but he was a drunk, and it was very hard for my mother. But it's about, you can love someone, but you also know their weaknesses, and you can't allow yourself to carry through life other people's shame. You can't make me, as a 12-year-old girl, carry the shame of my father being a drunk. He obviously has a drinking problem, but that can't be my problem.
Thank you. Yeah. I've been reading a lot in the United States. We have a lot of people coming to the fore, psychologists, etc., talking about dealing with narcissism. And one of the podcast persons is saying the way to infuriate a narcissist is to agree with them. And like he did a little mock out, like a guy saying to his girlfriend, "You're trash."
Oh, that's a lovely line. That's a lovely line. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. And he said, "You're trash. You look bad. The clothes are bad." And she said, "I know."
Yeah. So
take the air out.
There's no conversation after that. You win.
Zero. You didn't take the bait. So we have so much more in common than what separates us. I know that was one line that Kamala Harris said, and I believe it to be true. I think that what we're facing here, and we can lean on champions' shoulders such as yours, even across the oceans, that some people are single issue voters. Certainly in the United States, they will vote to protect an unborn or a fertilized egg. Let's just get serious. And so they may have cast a vote for that, but I'm not certain that in that casting of that vote, for some people, a single issue gives, in this case, President-elect Trump, carte blanche for the entirety of Project 2025, which no one really, I don't think many people have read. So I think there's this misconstruing of give an inch, take an entire mile, that it's incumbent now upon us to be calm under pressure, listen to what's being said, and strategize around, okay, that's your issue. You voted, you won on that issue. Now, these are the ancillary issues that continue to affect all of us. Let's join arms and get to justice for the bulk of the people. Else we won't.
That's right.
We won't have a middle class. It'll be an oligarchy, and we'll be all in the dust. So there's a need for us women to be finding our voices and listening to the other wise voices and binding together, drafting strategies, saying yes, as you've done your entire life, Wendy, and leading, because it is time. It's time for.
It's time. It's time. And she ran. I mean, she's in the prologue of my book, Kamala Harris. I said, she says, I'd read a book and I said, I don't want to just tell them how we felt. I want us to tell them what we did. And she ran a magnificent campaign on reproductive rights. And although she might be heartbroken, and and I know from the Americans that I read every day, the newspapers, there will be lots of people. But in the end, the margins weren't as big as we seem, but they give permission for things to change in a different way. But that will not be lost on the people who have participated in that. And you know what, 7 states changed their abortion laws by putting it on the legislature. And I think that it is, we all have to take heart that that is actually progress. It may not be everything, but it's really something. And that sometimes as women, we need to understand we don't get all of it at once, but if we can get it and embed it, so that more and more women, and in our reproductive rights campaign, because we did march, of course, because we always like a bit of a march, but I do think that there was another generation of women who had the confidence to speak out about it. And that's how we hold on dearly to what we achieve and our march towards equality, whatever it is. It's a shifting.
Thank you.
It's a shifting goalpost.
They are shifting goalposts, and I think I mean, I've said this for decades, and I didn't come up with it, but the second I heard it, it resonated. I believe in practice here in the United States, we are far more pro-birth rather than pro, else we would provide funding for child education when women go back into the workforce. And so I believe, regardless of which side of the fence one might sit on with regard to women's right to have agency over her own body, at some point, if we are going to promote women being baby creators, if you will, birthing every fertilized egg, then we better be in the judicial system and changing the unjust systems that don't give adequate child care funding or tax credits, period.
We need to help us mind the babies when we birth. But it's also about, how we have to decide. We hold reproduction in our bodies.
That's right.
And we have to look after that process. And that's why a woman's right to choose when, if, and how is so profoundly important. And I've noticed that for women who proceed with unplanned pregnancies, for whom it's very difficult, because I have to say that in rural Australia, it's getting increasingly difficult, and public hospitals are increasingly refusing to provide services. That I don't notice any of the protesters coming around to help the woman take that baby through life.
Well, this is it. And a friend,
and that's what you're saying.
A friend of mine said years ago when it was coming into Congress and so forth, well, whoever decides provides. So if you're going to dictate that every fertilized egg will be brought to birth, then just send that woman a check for the day. It was $24,000 a year for the next 24 years, and we'll all be done with it. And I have to say, I believe the discussion would have ended right then and there, because if we talk about money, you see, women are underpaid for our career work. We're underpaid to care for these babies that we are expected to birth. And it's a money issue. And I can see it plain as day.
And I think, there's a World Bank figure that says, 70% of the women of the world live in poverty. And I add to that, their children go with them.
Right now.
And where's the sense in that? There's no sense.
There's no sense. And we're thwarting. I mean, you cannot tell me that a hungry kid learns in school. A hungry kid does not learn as well as a kid with a full belly. And so this is the next generation coming through our education system. But of course, we have to value the education. So I can't get too far down that political rabbit hole tonight, but I can't thank you enough for the voice you have been for women, for mentors and mentees, because I have to think that the mentors were equally gifted, and certainly the mentees coming into their own. And thanks be to God, Sophie has purchased your business, your consulting practice from you, and carrying on your good work and your great name. Wendy, we thank you.
Thank you. It's just been the most glorious conversation. Thank you. I'm
My
looking
pleasure.
forward to you coming to Australia.
Right now, and you know I'm going to be looking you up, girlfriend.
Yes, good.
Okay. And the next time you're back in the United States, we're going to do this.
Yeah, we're going to do this. Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so very much. We appreciate you very so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.